I'd like to say one thing too, is that I have heard a few comments saying, oh look, this is just a number of people in Gould Street who are complaining about their own area. I'm going to address, I'm going to address this head on, because I like to address issues head on. That is utter rubbish. It is utter rubbish. Anyone who says that is very uneducated, and they haven't got their head on their shoulders correctly, because the design and outcome of Frankston Town Centre is relevant to all of us in this city. We all have ownership in the broader landscape. It's not just what happens right near us. If there's a big structure that's really totally out of context, it is sinfully ugly. Like this.
Yeah.
That's a matter of interest for all of our community, not just someone who may live nearby. So I'm going to make that very clear right here and now. Our next speaker is Professor Michael Buxton. Professor Buxton is Emeritus Professor of Environment and Planning, RMIT School of Global, Urban and Social Studies, where he taught for 20 years, as well as 30 years in academia. Michael also served as Mayor and Councillor at the then Mordialloc Council and held various management roles in the Victorian Government, including at the EPA. Professor Buxton is one of Melbourne's most respected and, happily, outspoken planning experts. Please welcome him.
I've got 30 minutes left, Sheila. Well, 28.
Thank you for the introduction. That's longer than my talk's going to be, so I may as well go now. Frankston's a beautiful place. I got here a bit early and went down to the beach. I used to come down to the beach at Frankston with mates of mine who used to live in Carrum. We used to frolic around down here and carry on. And it's amazing how beautiful it still is. And my father and his friends used to bring us down here when we were kids, and I've still got photographs of us on the sand right here. So I hate going back 50 years, 60 years, maybe even longer. It's terrible. But I went back and had a look and thought, oh, this is a lovely place to live. But like so many other places in Melbourne, it's under great threat, as you well know. I think it's a great shame that the state members aren't here today, particularly the minister, whose electorate is just next door. When I was in local government, state and federal politicians actually used to come to meetings like this, would you believe? I'm sure some of you will remember those meetings, and they might not have agreed with what the people at the meeting were saying, but they wanted to listen and inform themselves about what they might not know themselves and what they actually might learn. And it's a shame that this isn't happening, but I think it's terribly important that you get your views out to them and put your views directly to the state members, including the minister, because if you don't, then there's a vacuum that they exploit. Now just following along from what Calvin said, they're over here, they're going to drop a bomb on us, I think.
And there's a drone watching you too.
Yeah, they're watching us as well.
Oh yeah, look at it. Yeah.
Following along from what Calvin said, Calvin talked about NIMBYs being a derogatory term. You may have noticed in the media in the last few weeks that the Property Council and the Urban Development Institute and other development interests, really powerful groups, are waging a campaign to discredit people like you and us. They're trying to cast us as NIMBYs. This word NIMBY, it is a derogatory term because it implies that if we are concerned with our environment, we're selfish. And that's wrong. But they're trying to characterise opposition to further deregulating the planning system and allowing high-rise all over Melbourne as selfish. Now, the reason that the government listens to this is complex, but one of them is that they make $10 billion a year from property-related taxes. $10 billion a year. Over 5 times what they get from poker machines. This is the biggest industry in town. It's about 50% of the state-based Victorian tax-based income. It's 50% of what the state government gets, basically, if you don't, just from their state taxes and sources of revenue. This is big stuff. And of course, the developers as a result, get a look in. They can go to ministerial meetings, they can go into ministers' offices, they have lobby groups, and they can get their way. So somehow, communities have to find ways to pressure the representatives that are making these decisions, and the obvious way is through the ballot box and through individually pressuring the ministers. So let's just move to high-rise. What's wrong with high-rise? I think high-rise is a terrible thing.
Yeah, I do.
It's should never have been invented. It was probably invented when the Tower of Babel was proposed, and it's been around ever since.
And look what happened then.
And that fell down. High-rise has many detrimental impacts on communities. One is visual. I think visually a high-rise city, such as we see Melbourne has become, South Bank, I don't know whether you've been into South Bank and Docklands recently. South Bank is a series of high-rise towers which illustrate what happens when a city turns into a monolithic tower-based structure. High-rise has a series of detrimental impacts that we all know about, but I'll spell them out. One is that they shut off the sun, particularly many of them, and if there's a row of high-rise, such as will probably happen along the foreshore here, then the sun will be shut off from the east and the west, particularly in winter. It'll become a colder place. This is quite a windy area at times, and high-rise add to wind. A lot of people favour high-rise because they say it's a very efficient way to build. High-rise, it comes as a great shock to many people to find that high-rise is the highest per capita energy consuming structure in the world. It's a very inefficient way to live. And there's lots and lots of reasons for that, but that's the case. And what happens with high-rise cities is that they end up with an appearance that really reminds me a bit like a virus that has found a way to replicate. There's nothing that's replicated physically more than high-rise in the world. But of course, most of the Western cities in the world have rejected high-rise. I always find it amazing that our state government representatives in their holidays, they get on a plane and they go over to a place like Paris or Prague or Vienna. Now these are very dense cities. They're extremely dense. They're some of the densest cities on Earth, but they lack high-rise generally. There's some parts of them are high-rise, but the old cities don't allow high-rise. Most American cities are not high-rise residential areas. We all think, you know, New York and some other cities are classic high-rise cities, but most American cities have found ways to increase their density, such as California is at the moment, through the European style construction of 3 to 6 stories. But generally speaking, these cities are very dense, but they're low to medium-rise cities. They're generally low-rise cities. Most of the ancient Asian cities were low-rise cities, but the densest cities that have ever been built. The Middle Eastern cities were unfortunately many of the ancient ones have now been bombed out in the Syrian war and so on, but these were incredibly dense cities, but they were low-rise cities, so we don't need high-rise to achieve density. What we need is the government to communicate with people like yourselves and local government to identify areas that are capable of absorbing additional development and to work out with us, with the people, the type of development, the scale and the location. So if this is done, it can be done satisfactorily, and high-rise should be off the agenda because we don't need it and it has so many disadvantages. Unfortunately, over the last 20 years, Melbourne has now become one of the high-rise cities of the world, particularly the Western world. We've adopted the model of Beijing and Shanghai and so on, and that's not the way to go. Just a couple of other quick of the city of Frankston and the residents of the city off from the foreshore.
Yes, good to do.
Now, I've been around planning a long time, and if this came up as a draft proposal by one of our students, we'd fail them. It is bad idea. Frankston should be allowed to continue to face the foreshore. It should be allowed to open up the foreshore to all residents and not close it off. But what these developments are proposing to do is to appropriate the values that we all love for private purposes and to reject those values as available for public enjoyment. For example, people in high-rise, in the high-rise buildings, Calvin's right, they will be relatively expensive, and they have a view of the ocean.
Yeah, so
Back this way, they have a view of the town and the distant Dandenongs and the hinterland. The view is valuable, but what they've done is they've by having that made available for the private purchase of the people in the high-rise and for the profit of the developer, they have shut off the access to those very values that are then enjoyed by a limited number of people. So it's a form of privatisation of a public asset.
yes.
Now, I think it's a terrible idea. I'm shocked that it has got through the council. I'm shocked that the successive strategic documents that the council has prepared from 2005 have all included the possibility of high-rise along this location. That should never have been included in any strategic document, and neither should it be allowed in the planning scheme, in the statutory document, in the legal document. But it appeared in 2005, it reappeared in the latest strategic plan, and it's there, and it's been translated into a planning scheme which allows high-rise to be considered. And the way it's framed is that it can be considered as a discretionary use, and there is a preferred height limit. There's no mandatory height limit because the state government refuses to allow councils to introduce mandatory height controls. So they have this fictitious control called a discretionary height control. And of course the developers have nothing but contempt for that. They tell me they when they pop their bottles of champagne after winning an appeal against one of these controls, they call them blue sky controls because they're an invitation to go up and they're never taken any notice of. So the entire planning system is working against you, and it has to be changed. And this means the council has got to find some courage and strength and dedication and values to work out how to bring in proper planning controls to protect the values that you hold dear, or else they are going to be progressively eroded over time. Final point, this is only part of the government's agenda. The government is embarking, certainly in the next few months, maybe even the next few weeks, on a radical revision of the entire planning system. They're arguing there's too many rules. I struggle to find these rules. I look through the planning scheme and I try to find these rules. What rules? The whole planning system is based on the principle that it should advantage the development community, and what the government is going to do is to take more control away from local councils. They're going to bring in controls in major activity centres like Frankston, like Box Hill, like the suburban rail loop precincts, and even some of the smaller suburban communities. They're going to bring in controls that mean that there is what's known as an as of right use. So code assessed is the jargon. So there'll be a code. The application will, like this, will be assessed against a code. It's a ticker box. They will not be advertised in these locations. There will be no permit required. There'll be no right of appeal. All resident rights will be removed. And this is over a very significant part of Melbourne. That's the deal that the development community has done in secret with the state government, and they're going to announce it sometime relatively soon. Now, it may not include Frankston now, but Frankston is a major activity. It's one of the big activity centres in the strategic plan for Melbourne. If they get away with this for areas like the suburban rail loop precincts and others, it will come to Frankston. And these sorts of developments will just go through on a ticker box with no right of objection, appeal, or even notification. You won't even be told they're going to happen. So that's the plan. It sounds radical. It is radical. It's about as radical you can get, because it really shows an underlying view of the government that it treats the people as enemies instead of as friends. So I wish you well in your endeavour. I do think this is worth fighting for. It's a very important place, not only for this particular area, but for the whole of Frankston. And I think it has metropolitan significance because Frankston is such an interesting, worthwhile, useful area for the city, and it has so many intrinsic values in itself that it deserves to be saved and protected. So good luck for the future.